So, South Africa has ended 2025 with its lowest average inflation rate in more than 2 decades, coming in at around 3.2%, and that's close to the lower edge of the country's newly adopted 3% inflation target. Now, December's consumer price inflation edged slightly higher to 3.6%, suggesting that price pressure may be stabilizing rather than falling further. Now, for many African economies grappling with high food and energy costs, currency volatility, and tight borrowing conditions, South Africa's experience raises a wider question. Is this a local story or a signal of a broader shift across the continent? Well, to unpack what's driving these numbers and what they mean for households, investors, and policymakers in 2026, we're now joined by economist and policy strategist Xhanti Payi. Xhanti, so good to talk to you. It's been an age. I hope you've been keeping well.
It's been a very, very long time, Peter. It's really good to see you, and good morning to the listeners.
So, South Africa managing 3.2%. And I just want to put this into context for our listeners. And we're really competing with the heavyweights. I looked at the G7. The average across the G7, I think, is around 2 something percent. But we're beating the UK, which is on about 3.5%. How has South Africa managed to do this?
Well, there's been a combination of issues, Peter. The one obviously has been that we have not seen a high level of demand. So, there's been a lot of pressures on demand, so a lot of people struggling. But also we've seen, a moderation over a period of time in prices because we came also from a high place. So we've been very lucky because obviously all prices have moderated very, very nicely. The increases that we used to see in electricity prices and other utilities have not been as sharp. We've also obviously seen a much more stable exchange rate that has also been helpful. And then food prices have come down, at least food inflation has come down, even though it's still a tad high, it has come down quite reasonably. So a number of combination of things that has happened over a period of time has been quite encouraging to this lower number.
So, the central bank now works with a 3% inflation target. Take us through the thinking of that, and if this is what's contributed to what we're seeing.
Sure. So the target is important because, in fact, you started out very well to say we are looking at our peers and we are looking at their inflation. And so we needed to target something that bring us closer to our investment, I guess, and our trade peers, because that's an important thing in terms of flow of investment, and our ability to engage in a much more effective and sustainable way. So we've always been wanting to sort of say, look, if our inflation is close to to our peers, and our interest rates should also be able to align in that way, because we know the higher inflation you've got, the higher interest rates that you have in order to be able to attract that capital, or at least those real interest rates. So we should be able to see real interest rates sort of align nicely to those of of our peers, or at least of the markets in which we want to engage with in terms of investment and trade. So that has been one important and clear drive towards a lower target. Now, obviously, a lower target does not always translate to lower inflation. Yes, we are targeting a lower number, but to reach that target requires a number of things. Of course, higher interest rates a little bit for longer, and then a much more important drive into what the South African Reserve Bank has consistently been saying are structural issues to our inflation. So issues around obviously infrastructure, issues around wages, and other issues that have caused inflation to remain higher in South Africa, above average wage increases and the likes. So over a period of time, we've tried really to bring that down, and that has been successful somewhat. But it is important to obviously highlight that lower demand has been one of the important drivers that have seen lower inflation. So if South Africa's economy, for example, were to pick up perhaps at a faster rate, we may see that we don't hold that. So, and maybe we need higher interest rates. So it's encouraging, but one of the key things, as I said, for that lower target has been that we want to align ourselves. And I think it came out at a time when we were hosting the G20, and we were comparing ourselves and saying, well, if we are actually in this group of play where average, as we have highlighted, is lower, we need to align properly.
I think you may have partly answered my next question. So the target is 3%. I think December came in at 3.6%. So what does this mean? Is inflation likely to start swinging the other way? Has it stabilized? How are you tracking it?
Sure. It's tough to say because we are seeing the kinds of swings in global markets. It was very comforting yesterday to listen to President Trump saying he's not going to go to war in order to get Greenland. So that was something that was quite encouraging because that's one of the key worries about really what is the risk environment globally that could see a spike in commodity prices that could definitely have an impact on this. Then also food prices are looking good, even though they're a little bit higher. That is something that is always a worry, especially if we are thinking about the impacts of climate change. That's one area that's of serious concern because we know, Peter, that on a periodic basis, we are no longer able now to project rains and heat and all of the factors that can affect agricultural output and therefore translate into food prices, which is an important driver in our inflation count, apart from other commodities. And unfortunately, climate impacts are such that we are not able now to focus on that. But it is something that the Reserve Bank is watching quite closely. So that's something that will be of concern as we look at this number. But what is encouraging, though, is that the Reserve Bank has been very clear that they are looking they will be able to look through some of these swings because they understand that these are things that are now part or at least partly baked into this number of inflation, and they're willing to look in through some of these risks that I've highlighted as saying that they'll probably be temporary and actually try and focus on what might be the medium to longer term inflation rate so that we are not targeting 3% and punishing the economy for things that may be outside of our bearing.
All right, and perhaps finally and briefly, if you can, lessons for other African economies that are watching South Africa. What should they be doing? I mean, I think Federal Reserve and central bank independence must be one of them.
Yeah, you've answered your own question. It is that will be key. That independence is a key driver. But certainly another thing that is important is that we need really to work harder at the structural issues. So making sure that our economies are productive, that we are removing all impediments that could be inflationary. So things that actually, for example, force prices to go higher, that, for example, productivity, agricultural support, all of the key drivers of inflation are things that we are focused on so that we can support production and make sure that supply is always available to meet the demands that are on the continent, and that should keep stabilizing prices.
Xhanti, it's been too long. Let's make sure that our next chat is much sooner. But thank you so much for making sense of this inflation story in South Africa for us.
Thank you so much, Peter.
Is a economist, researcher, and making sense of this great news story for South Africa. 3.2% average for 2025, 3.6% at the moment, and that is fantastic news, especially when you consider huge economies around the world, some of them with much higher inflation rates. It's time for your news as we start the second hour of Rise and Shine. Here's Jolani Tulongwepe. Good morning.